Hello, everybody. My name is Maria Carreira. I'm co-director of the National Heritage Language Resource Center at UCLA, and I'm also a professor of Spanish at California State University, Long Beach. In this presentation, I want to tell you about how I use the poll feature of Zoom to level up learning and engagement. So let's start with what it is. What is the poll feature? On your screen, you can see two sample polls, and this is the view that your students would get when they're taking a poll. As the instructor, you would also see how they're responding, how many are answering yes or no to your questions. And after your students are done answering your questions, you would be able to share the results. Now, the poll on the number one on the left is one that I actually used in my class the first day of instruction after I had presented the syllabus and discussed how the class would be structured. I gave students this poll to check for understanding, to make sure that they had learned what I wanted them to learn, and if they hadn't, to clear up any gaps in knowledge. The poll on the right is one I gave the second day of instruction. There, I wanted to preview a project that my students are currently working on. And that project involves documenting the effects of the pandemic on Latinos in Southern California. This poll, unlike poll number one, doesn't have right or wrong answers. I wanted to use this poll to get students thinking about their pandemic, to get information about how they view the pandemic, how they feel about it, what they think are the most affected areas of life by the pandemic. And then to use this information to get students talking and get them excited about the project that we will be doing this semester. So in this sense, I was using this poll to set up preview or prepare for upcoming work. So now I want to talk about specifically how I use the poll feature to level up learning and engagement. Of course, as language teachers, when we hear the words level up, we think of the ACTFL proficiency guidelines. And here it's just important to remember that we are talking about performance, which is what students can do in the classroom. We can also think about leveling up in terms of Bloom's taxonomy, which, as you know, is a hierarchy of cognitive functions or levels of learning. Classroom studies indicate that most of the activities and the questions that teachers pose in the classroom remain at the level of remembering or understanding. That's too bad, because it's when we ask our students to discuss, to question, to appraise a design, when that happens, we are really engaging them cognitively, which means they are getting turned on to the thinking, what they're learning, what they can do with what they're learning. So moving up Bloom's taxonomy, leveling up Bloom's taxonomy is essential to establishing cognitive engagement. It's also useful for establishing social presence, which is the presence that students have as individuals in a group, where they're seen for their preferences, their personality, and where they connect with others because they know those aspects of other students. So it's essential to creating an individual presence as well as connectedness in the classroom. And that's why it's so important to think about leveling up using Bloom's taxonomy. So now I'm ready to move on to the demonstration part of the video. I'm going to show you specifically how I use the poll function to level up cognitive engagement, to level up social presence and connectedness, and to level up language. Before I do, I want to remind you about the two uses of the poll function that I've already presented: to check for understanding and to set up an activity. This is a quiz I made up for purposes of this presentation, and it could be turned into a poll. I'll show you how I do that. So now I'm going to use it to check for understanding in this hypothetical class where I'm going to use Little Red Riding Hood, as well as for leveling up thinking. The first question, what did Little Red Riding Hood have in the basket, is a straightforward remembering question. The second question is an understanding question. Who says this? What big ears you have? Notice now, it's not just a matter of remembering the sentence, it's kind of reconstructed where the sentence could have been said and who could have said it. So it's at a deeper level than remembering. The third question involves applying or interpreting the character's words or actions to find an adjective that applies to them. And finally, the fourth question involves analyzing or comparing, identifying with a character. You will notice that the fourth question has a little asterisk. The reason for this is that I want to point out that this question by itself does not check for understanding. For instance, I could check off the hunter as being the character I am most identified with. And I might do it thinking that because a hunter like me likes opera. Obviously, that doesn't show any understanding on my part, since the story does not give us any information of that nature. So in order to check for understanding with a question like this, which has no right or wrong answer, I have to follow up with an activity that engages students in explaining their answer. What are some possible activities? Well, a class discussion about the most popular answers for this question. So I could share the results of the poll, and then I could engage students in talking about why some characters were so popular. I could also have group work where students explain why they chose a particular character. Notice that both of these activities increase social presence and connectedness. Students express themselves. We get to know them as individuals. And they can also be used to level up language. Here's a good way to level up language. I use the can-do statements. And for this demonstration in particular, I am going to focus on students' ability to express, react to, and support preferences and opinions in conversation. So this is the interpersonal mode. And I'm going to assume that my students are at the novice mid-level, and I want to bring them up to the intermediate low level. As you read through this, you will see that there are certain things that my students are going to have to do in order to communicate, to perform at this level. They're going to have to give details as to their preferences, and they're going to have to create using simple sentences. So now I have to prepare my students to do this. Here, I'm going to use questions 2 and 3, which remember I had used originally to check for understanding. Now they're going to do double duty, as I'm going to use them to give my students strategy for finding details and language that they can use in the follow-up activity. This is what question 2 looks like. Clearly, the answer is Little Red Riding Hood said that. Question 2 asks, what adjectives best describe Little Red Riding Hood? And especially if you consider question 2, that she said, oh my, what big ears you have, you can see that she is observant. Now you might be saying, my students are not going to know observant, sly, artistic, rude, any of those. Okay, so this might mean that you have to pre-teach these adjectives, or you might want to include a translation in the poll in English of what these adjectives are, or pictures, whatever is needed. Right? So students will take this poll and answer accordingly, including answering the third question. Now I am going to debrief. And here's what I'm going to do in the debriefing process. I'm going to model a good answer. So I'm going to say, I identify with the grandmother. And now I'm going to give details as to my preferences and create using simple sentences. So I will say, I identify with the grandmother because I'm old. Also, I like cake and wine. I see that Little Red Riding Hood's mother says, come, Little Red Riding Hood, here's a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. So notice now that through this answer, which draws on the activities of the poll, right? One of them was identifying who said something, and the other one was using adjectives. I have expressed social presence, and I have performed at the intermediate low level. And so, to summarize, in this video, I have shown you how to level up thinking using Bloom's taxonomy, how to level up proficiency using the ACTFL guidelines, in particular, the can-do statements. And finally, how to level up social presence, selecting questions for your poll that lead to students revealing something about themselves. I hope this presentation was useful to you. Please write to me with your ideas. Thank you.